You probably didn't know this, but famous actor Matthew McConaughey and my next guest have one thing in common. They made a boatload of money off one of the biggest mining scams in history, pretty much. And my guest also made $100 million on uranium. And I'm happy to have my guest on. It is Mr. Warren Irwin. Warren, it's great to have you on. We've been meaning to do this for years. Good to see you.
Really, really great to be on. Thanks, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I love the intro. Like you have a bit of a history, of course. I think you got started in mining with the Bre-X scandal, right? If
Yeah,
I'm
that
not
was my baptism by fire, pretty much. Yeah, it was quite a way to start my mining investment career, for sure.
absolutely,
For
because
sure.
I remember you telling the story. You made money on the long and the short side of that stock.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
I
and
made about three. I was a punk kid, and I started with eight. I had 80 grand saved up for a down payment on a house. Then I tripled it in a distressed real estate stock, and then I made. What did I do? I turned it into $250,000. Then I turned it into 3.5 million on Bre-X back in the '90s when 3.5 million would buy you something. Not anymore.
no, that time's gone. Like that time is
Yeah.
gone. I remember
Yeah.
when reaching a million was an achievable goal, but that is meaningless these days. So,
Yeah. Now you own a mediocre house in Vancouver.
not even a house, it's probably a studio apartment for that money. Quite honestly, like, but words like let's stay on the topic of gold, right? And lots
Sure.
going on in the gold space right now. Quite topical. Let's start with something that just happened today. B2 Gold announced a merger, a takeout offer for Sabina Gold. Last week, we've seen Newmont bid for Newcrest, $16.9 billion. A lot of action in the sector. We haven't seen as much action in the sector in quite a while. How excited are you? Like, you're a hedge fund. Does that actually excite you? Is that something you're looking for?
Uh, it's exciting in some ways, and in other ways, it's not. It's not always that great to have some of these majors all merging together, because what that means is if you do indeed find a gold discovery, there'll be fewer people competing to buy it. So that's the negative of it, and the positive, is that the Sabina shareholders will have some cash to reinvest in the sector again. So that'll be recycled again in the sector. So that's always good. But the whole thing is for me, what I do is I invest in early stage situations, often with just initial signs of a discovery, and then we just drill it out and sell it. And the key is we need buyers to buy them, to put them into production, because I try not to ever invest in a junior that actually puts it into production itself, because that means your project is not big enough for a major to care about. But yeah, so it's a tricky time, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, risk increase exponentially as well if you have to execute yourself. Obviously, you got the financing risk,
Yeah.
execution risk. Let's not go there. But
Yeah.
it's like the underlying theme seems to be a little bit the majors and everybody else seem to believe in gold again. Like, there was a bit of a malaise the last 12, 18 months in the whole sector. Like, after August 2020, we've been, like, especially the juniors, been pretty much beaten to a pulp. And
Yeah.
finally, some lifeblood has come back into the sector. Like, what's your thesis on gold and the overall health of the sector?
Well, my general thought is, and just to give you a sense, a little bit of history on me, um, is in the last 25 years running Rosseau, we've made just a little over half of our money investing in junior gold. So it's a sector that we know pretty well. And where we've made most of our money, or virtually all of our money, is buying early stage companies that make big discoveries. And in virtually all instances, we sell out to a major. And occasionally I'll figure out they're not going the way I want to go, and I'll move out of them. But generally, we back companies early stage, make a discovery, and we sell it out. So that's sort of where I am now. Taking a look right now, the biggest issues, and I've sat down with some of the biggest CEOs in the business to chat about gold. And what's happening right now, dynamically, is the big gold producers are running out of little discoveries to buy, right? Like, when's the last time you saw a 10 or 20 million ounce discovery? They're just not there. And those are the types of discoveries you need to move the needle for these majors. So I think what you're seeing here, what you will see in the future, is at least the majors will actually merge. That's one way to get big ounces under management. The other one is I think right now the best place to find big ounces of production of gold is in copper porphyries. And you're seeing that with the Barrick. They're moving forward with the Reko Diq project in Balochistan province of Pakistan. That's really where these gold companies will get the biggest lift, and you'll get 10s and 20s and 30 million ounces in these copper porphyries, and you'll use the copper as a credit against your gold. So in some instances, quite a number of the instances, you'll have a negative cost of producing the gold if you buy a copper porphyry, and that's really how the only way they're going to get their production up to any meaningful amount.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned Reko Diq. I think it's an interesting example because it's in a jurisdiction that not a single junior is in right now that I know of, at least not publicly listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange, or it's in a jurisdiction that nobody would touch, right? Like, do we have to go to places that you wouldn't go there? Like, I interviewed Brent Cook in Vancouver last week, and he said he's getting comfortable with Bolivia, for example.
Yeah. I know I've heard more people are getting comfortable with Bolivia. I have not done the work. I have some familiarity with Balochistan because I have an investment in some privates there, where we're looking at picking up some assets there in the mining sector. Balochistan is a very dangerous place, but we believe that with as Barrick starts moving along into production, the army will make sure there'll be quite a bit more stability there, but it'll still be a dangerous place to operate. But it does indeed give you a sense as to what the big mining companies are willing to do in terms of political risk to get those ounces under management. And and the other theme too is I think you're seeing a lot of the majors. They're actually starting to take a little bit more copper exposure, and partially for the gold component. But I think there are certain government entities, I don't want to get into it specifically, it would be breaching some confidences, but shall I say, there are certain governments in the Western world that are encouraging the big miners to possibly mine a little bit of copper. And as you know, there's state the obvious, there is a Cold War going on right now between China and the Western world. And I think a lot of the big governments headed by the US does not like to see world-class copper assets going into the hands of the Chinese. And there are, in my opinion, not enough copper miners. So I think a few of the gold majors are being asked, well, why don't you take a look at some copper porphyries and mine a little bit copper for us too. So that's a really very fascinating trend. I've never seen the government entering the mining sector and having chats with CEOs about strategic metals before.
No, absolutely. It's like a personal anecdote as well. I chatted with the German general consul in Vancouver, and it seemed like somebody lit a fire under his butt. Like, actually, he said, Kai, like, introduce companies to us, like, and we will introduce them down the food chain more or less until they get the help they need to develop a project. Like, there was as you said, there's a sense of urgency.
Yep. Yeah, and they're not very happy, as you know. The Canadians just put a law forward that we cannot sell, and this is very interesting, in that we cannot sell strategic metals, companies that have strategic metals, to Chinese state-controlled entities, which is kind of wacky when you think about it, because let's take a look at, let's say, neolithium, right? Well, neolithium, you're looking at a South American project, Canadian listed, but the Canadian government's going to indicate who's going to end up owning a South American lithium project. That it's getting pretty wacky. And from what I'm hearing from conversations is the Americans are basically saying, are you with us or against us? And so there's some interesting and very fascinating dynamics here. In addition, the Cold War dynamics, plus the whole dynamic of the strategic metals and the battery metals. And I think years ago, the Chinese did themselves a very great disservice by restricting some of the rare earth metals, as you're probably aware, right? So it's just like when the Russians have played the game with natural gas in years past. Any smart person would not have sourced their gas from Russia following that period of time. Of course, I guess the Germans weren't paying attention at the time.
No, we weren't. Apparently not. We didn't learn from that. So,
Yeah, yeah.
not much, at least. Now we're scrambling. No.
Yeah, how's your wind and solar going?
Actually, just like the winter, the winter has been amazing. I got a photovoltaic on my roof, and like in February so far, I've been 55% autark, like not using grid power, which is great.
Right on, right on.
But
No, what I meant
saved by the
what,
weather. But other than
what
that,
I meant
like,
by that was how are the Germans doing this winter? Wind and solar trying to power the world. That's not going to happen. We need nuclear. It's pretty obvious, and Greenpeace hasn't figured that one out yet. So.
No, we got lucky. We got lucky this winter.
Yeah,
we got saved by the weather. I was wearing shorts on December 31st. That's how lucky we got. Okay, like just to put context around it. It's crazy.
Yes.
But never thought I'd agree with Greta Thunberg, actually, saying nuclear might be part of the solution. If you throw it,
Ty, it's more than part of the solution. When you work out the mathematics, like the amount of wind and solar we need and the lifespan of the windmills, they just don't last, right? And I used to have a yacht, and I'd have it on the Great Lakes, and I'd zip along the eastern coast of Lake Huron, and then from the bottom to the top, it's all wind farms, and they've got a 20-year life, maybe 30 years. And where are these massive turbines going to go after that? Well, they're tough to recycle, and you have to bury them in a big pit somewhere, and that's and then all
the counter argument with uranium that we have to bury it somewhere, at least the nuclear waste in a salt mine. I thought that was always one of the counter arguments to nuclear energy was we don't know how to dispose of it.
Oh yeah. No, we could talk all day about nuclear waste. The old saying is, how much nuclear waste has been generated since the beginning of time, right? And it's basically a football field, let's say, 9 feet high, and that's all the nuclear waste in the world. And what's happened with all the paranoia about nuclear waste is they're just now kept in containers at the nuclear facilities, and that's where they are, because everybody freaks out when you even put them on the highway to ship them to a depository. And there's a lot of common sense solutions to nuclear waste that are totally blown out of proportion by the greenies, who until very recently were very anti-nuclear, and now they're going, gee, we saw what happened in Texas, we saw what happened in Germany. We can't power a modern economy on wind and solar. I wonder, maybe this nuclear might not be the worst idea. And nuclear has killed way less people than the number of hydro dams that have been breached, or the various other alternative sources of energy. It's a pretty safe one, despite the paranoia and the sensationalism about some of the nuclear accidents that have happened. So it's interesting. Nuclear energy is obviously the only option for baseload. We've already dammed up all the rivers, and my hope is someday that there will be sufficient nuclear power out there that we can actually, perhaps even one day, undam some of these rivers and get them flowing naturally again. But that'll be many decades in the future.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like that's an interesting. I've never heard that one. Like undam the rivers. Actually, that's an interesting one. I need to look at it.
I'm a forward thinker. So
it's interesting. Like what is happening? The energy transition. Of course, there needs to, like burning coal and oil is maybe not the best solution, right? But it's still more energy efficient than some of the other solutions being proposed. I think photovoltaics is now up to 22-23% energy efficient. Like capturing and converting energy into like power. I think the efficiency is 22-23%, if I'm not mistaken. Uranium was what, 99%?
It's up there. The thing I love about nuclear power over solar is the life. You're seeing it right now with the extensions of life of nuclear power plants around the world, both in Japan, the US, everywhere. They're getting pretty long lives. We're talking like 80 years. I bet there's a chance we could get through 100 years where these plants are running for 100 years. And what I really like about nuclear, and this is where I have an axe to grind with Greenpeace, is for the last half century, we've been burning coal instead of using nuclear power plants. So they got to wear that, right? We've been burning coal instead of using nuclear power plants for the last 50 years. Greenpeace should wear that. They're anti-nuke. The only option to nukes is burning coal. So we've been burning coal for half a century. They've also set back the R&D in nuclear power plants by almost a half a century because government funding was cut. But what's interesting now, you're probably hearing a lot of these small modular reactors. I think they're pretty exciting. The thing I like about them, I have some friends in the business, and they're fail safe, right? So your fuel in some instances, especially with molten salt reactors, is the fuel's already in liquid form, and if you stop providing power to the fission reactor, the process just slows down and stops. So it's a fail safe, which I think is fantastic. And I have some very futuristic options for nuclear waste. And not only that, Bill Gates, too, you're probably aware, he's developing reactors that'll run on nuclear waste. So there's some really cool stuff in the future. And I really look forward to seeing some more R&D money getting into nuclear power plants.
And it's coming. I think there's a shift in mentality. Sorry, happening worldwide, which is really interesting to see. Because after Fukushima, Germany said no more nukes. We closed them down pretty much 3 weeks after. Said okay, we're done with them. Like 3 weeks after, like mind blowing stuff. But now there's like you open our newspapers again, and the narrative has completely changed, which is actually awesome to see. Okay.
Oh, the Germans got tired of buying nuclear power
from France.
From France?
Yeah. and then complaining that they're shutting them down because of summer issues. Like, let's not go there. That's a whole different story. But you brought up SNRs, small nuclear reactors.
Or SMRs,
modular reactors. Because I wanted to ask you about uranium demand, supply and demand. It's for me like an interesting topic because it also leads to investing in mining stocks, junior mining stocks, exploration stocks in the sector. How do you see the SMRs sort of affecting supply and demand on the physical side for uranium?
It's just a matter of, it's just going to take a long time, right? People complain about, well, Warren, there's going to be so much demand for uranium that the mines can't keep up. And I'll go, well, I would almost bet, let's see how long it takes to permit and build a nuclear power plant versus how long it takes to permit and build a uranium mine. And I don't think the timelines will be much different. They both take a long time to do. So.
Interesting. Like we've been talking off record before we hit the record button about like what's happening on the supply and demand side, and I told you like I'm not really a fan of investing in uranium stocks because my problem is I don't understand where the supply comes from. Okay, it's like I have to admit I haven't done like years and years of research on the topic, but for me, there's always seems to be enough. There's always to be some. I don't know, maybe somebody's dismantling some nuclear bomb or something, but all of a sudden there's 40 million pounds of uranium. Then Sprott Uranium Trust shows up on site, just buys up everything they can find, and there's still enough out there. So, like, explain that one to me a little bit, Warren. Like, try to make it like palpable as well, or maybe even make it interesting for me to invest. Or should I even invest? And how do I make sense of it?
Well, let's take a look before we jump into the supply, because the supply is the tricky part. But on the demand side, it's pretty easy to track nuclear. No, not super duper easy, but it's reasonably easy to figure out how many nuclear power plants are under construction, right? So the rumor is there's about 50 in China under construction. There's one or two around the rest of the world, but China's got the big build out happening, right? It's just like the big build out that Greenpeace shut down in the 70s in the US, right? So the thing I mentioned to people is like we're looking at 50 reactors. The base operating number of reactors around 450. So if there's 50 under construction, they'll be completed over the next 5 years. You're looking at 10 a year. So you go 10 reactors over the 450 install base already. You're looking at very low single-digit growth, right? So the growth in demand is going to be there, but it's not going to be as rampant as you're seeing in some of the other, let's say, the battery metals, for instance. Like if you could see a pretty significant demand in electric cars year over year growing at much greater than a low single digit rate. So some of those demand will grow quite a bit quicker than uranium. Problem is on the demand side, it just takes forever to build a nuclear reactor. And then while they're being built, of course, some of them are just getting so old, they're being decommissioned, right? So, therein lies the issue. We've got low single digit growth in demand. So the argument has always been, well, Warren, and this has been for last, let's say, in my, like a little bit about my background in the uranium space. I made a a bunch of money last cycle. Biggest win I had was with extract uranium. We had the Husab project. We sold that to the Chinese. I also owned a few zeros, which I'm cautioning people about in this cycle. They were basically ones that came out when the market was hyped up. I was stupid enough to buy some of them, and they went to zero, like many of the 400 or so, like virtually all of the 400 or so baloney uranium companies that were created the last cycle when it spiked to, let's say, 140 or the range, right? So the essence, from what I could tell, is it's not about the demand, because it's obvious the demand can't grow super fast. So it's about supply. And you're looking on the supply side, there's about 180 million, these are the rough numbers, 180 million pounds needed. There's about 130 million pounds, 140 million pounds produced from mine supply. So there's always been 40 to 50 million pounds that's been, like you said, magically appears in the market. So the argument I make is in the last 7 years, let's say that I got involved again on the second phase of uranium after the Husab sale, was with NextGen. So let's say 7 years ago, I got involved in NextGen. And I was quite optimistic as a naive investor that, not only are we going to make a bunch of money on NextGen, we're going to find a bunch of uranium, but we're also going to get a pretty strong uranium market. But then for some reason, for the last 7 years, there's always been this 50 million pounds that sort of lands on our lap that just comes from various sources. People are saying, oh, it's the Japanese. And I do some research on the Japanese, when they shut down after Fukushima, they're saying, oh, the Japanese are producing are selling off all their extra stockpiles. And I talk to people like a senior executive, people give me grief. They say, Warren, you never say who you're talking to. Well, the reason is I'm talking to people who are pretty well known and they're famous. And if I keep dropping their names, you're not going to talk to me anymore. So let's put it this way. I spoke with somebody who was a household name in the uranium business. I said, what's this? I hear about the Japanese selling off the uranium stockpiles. They're not doing that, Warren. He said they're already in fuel bundles and they're just going to sit there until a later date. It takes a long time to take the fuel bundles apart and reverse it, and then create it back into a product you could sell to somebody else. So I'm not an expert on building fuel rods and fuel packages for nuclear reactors, but my sense is, the Japanese have done a lot of that. And I think since then, there's been some people I know that have looked at some of the balance sheets of the Japanese utilities, and they've shown that is indeed the case. They haven't been selling their uranium. So it's still sitting on their books. So now that they're firing back up again, they have a significant amount of uranium already in fuel rods. So they're not going to be out there buying a bunch in a panic. But, at some point they'll start buying again. I don't know when. So, but suffice to say, over the past 7 years, there's been 50 million pounds hitting the market from some unknown sources. And the issue with, obviously with the uranium is it's quite secretive, quite government controlled. So in the 7 years I've watched it, that's 50 million pounds times 7 years. It's 350 million pounds appears out of nowhere. And then you add Yellowcake and Sprott Uranium Trust at another 70 million pounds. So that's 420 million pounds that nobody could tell me where it came from. And in the early times I was investing in NextGen, I had probably the smartest guy I know in the uranium space. He told me, Warren, don't get too excited about uranium. There's a billion pounds of it just sitting around. There's lots of uranium. And I go, no, there can't be. Look at the supply demand. And then I was proven wrong over the next 7 years, because sure enough, this market, all this uranium is hitting the market. So the big uranium bulls out there are obviously, you cannot be bullish on the demand side, because frankly, the growth rates, you cannot convince me that the growth rates are going to be anything other than low single digits for a while, right? Until we start really ramping up building nuclear power plants, which will eventually happen. But it's really we got to figure out where this amount comes from. And then you look at on the supply side too. We had problems with the oversupply just a few years ago, and that's when Kazatomprom cut back production 20%, and now they're just down 10%. Now they're going back to kind of full production. And the former CEO of Kazatomprom I spoke with, he said, Warren, you give me $100 million, we'll have more production on in a year's time. Then people were freaked out about the Ukraine-Russian war. oh, it's going to shut off all the supply from Kazakhstan. Well, there's a really good YouTube video, about an hour long, by the head of corporate development, investor relations at Kazatomprom, explaining what they've done to make sure that the West still gets uranium, and all through the convoluted ways to get it out of Kazakhstan. So that hasn't caused a big shortage of product. And I believe Kazakhstan has a significant amount more production they could put on if they so decide to do so. And then you've got, of course, Cameco shut down both Cigar Lake and McArthur River, and they're firing those back up again. And then you've got, NextGen, the big daddy, coming at us with 30 million pounds at some point in the future. I think a couple of years permitting, let's say 4 years mine build, so maybe 6 years out down the pipe, we got 30 million pounds coming at us from there. And then you've got, Cameco's got a bunch of projects that they bought last cycle, like Kintyre, Yeelirrie in Australia. You have, guys with Rough Rider. I know Global Uranium's moving forward with their projects. You've got GOVX in Niger. And then you've just had recently, too, on the supply side, you've had both Sweden and Brazil both open up their countries to uranium mining. I remember looking back at Brazil last cycle, and we'd found a big uranium deposit there, and we couldn't move forward with it because of the ban. But that uranium's still sitting there in Brazil. Interestingly, I know of a company that's just staked, just coincidentally, just prior to the removal of the restrictions in Sweden, staked 700 million pounds of proven up uranium resources already drilled up. Probably not super economic at these prices, but we get the big run in uranium that people are expecting, and there's 700 million pounds that could come to market. So from what I could see, we have lots and lots of uranium out there, and that's without even these secret sources that seem to want to throw money and then throw stuff at the market. And so I'm not as freaked out as a lot of people are about the supply. I know how many people are running around today creating all these uranium juniors, hoping that we're going to get a big spike in uranium prices for whatever reason. And so they're hoping a repeat of, the 06, 07.
Yeah.
So they're getting all geared up. And
it's interesting. You walk around Vancouver, and fortunately, right now the craze is lithium. I don't think they have caught on to uranium just yet, but that's the next logical step, obviously. Of the juniors out there, and I don't want you to name names, like how many of them are valid? How many do you think they have a chance to turn into something? You mentioned a couple names. I heard out, like I picked up, but are there any others? And again, you don't have to mention names. I'm not interested in the names.
Okay, sure. No, it's a matter, Kai, of what price level you're talking about. People are saying, you need a $75 price level to get new projects going. Well, I just ran into somebody from one of the brokerage firms who was very happy that they raised a whole bunch of money for Global Atomic. And Global Atomic, the reason I know them is I know Steve Roman, known him for almost 20 years probably. And I remember they were around the last cycle. And I'm not sure where GOVX is. And they've been around since, again, the last cycle. I remember the Friedlands came in to pitch me on that deal. I bought a bit of it and lost a pile of money on it when the uranium cycle collapsed, right? So there's these projects out there that are moving forward, but if we get $75, $80 uranium, like a lot of people are calling for, return to 150, 200, all these crazy numbers. Well, I could assure you this 700 million pounds that sitting around in Sweden, it'll be coming on stream at those kind of numbers. And I think the market will choke on it. And so we could get some small, some near-term dislocations in the uranium space. But from what I could tell, and I'm not saying I see all the deals, but when anybody has a junior uranium company, they always call me up, and I'm overwhelmed, frankly, with all the uranium out there. And so I don't share the same views as a lot of the neophytes that, there's going to be a shortage of uranium. Well, we got lots of uranium. It's just like, you saw the recent run in lithium, right? Like we got lots of lithium in the world. But we'll
No, it's like I
themselves.
got to refer to, it's like at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, you were on a panel. It's like how to make a boatload of cash in uranium stocks. Okay,
Yeah,
which is now
yeah.
an interesting question because you're fairly neutral on uranium. Of course, you got your favorites. You understand the market really, really well, but you're not euphoric, right? So how does one make a boatload of cash in uranium stocks? Like when I read that topic, my gut instinct was to short sell, obviously. But
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what was your like takeaway there from that panel?
We had a great time on the panel. When that panel comes out, it's a must watch. It was lots of fun. I enjoyed it a lot. And I imagine I upset a few people, but you know, uh, the issue I have with the uranium space right now is any of the juniors I would invest in, they seem quite expensive. And there's so many people all excited about the big run in uranium that's inevitably going to happen, right? I'm just going, well, you're pricing in a big run, everything's really expensive. I said, I'll just go somewhere else where nobody cares about the sector and I could get in super duper cheap. And so I just go elsewhere. And so I'm gradually moving out of even next gen. Next gen's getting too blue chip for me. I'm more of a high risk guy. Next gen's too established. But yeah, they were. It was interesting. There was one interesting question on the panel we were asked was, what is the sell signal for the uranium market? Like, when should you get out of it? Well, first of all, I'm not convinced we're going to get the big spike that we had last time. It kind of reminds me of when we had the big spike in gold back in 1981 or 82. And for the next 30 years, everybody was just hoping we were going to get a spike like that again. And so we had this big spike in uranium in 2006, 2007. Everybody's just hoping for the big spike because they saw everybody make so much money. And, I'm not saying the most bearish on uranium because I'm not bearish on uranium. Uranium is going to tick higher gradually over time. It's
Fine.
not I believe that, but I'm not like pretty much everybody out there, from what I could tell, they're all raw uranium. Warren, you're the dumbest guy I've ever met, despite making a pile of money in uranium, possibly more than 99% of investors out there. Warren, you don't know what you're talking about. Uranium's going to the moon. And then, okay, all right, great, okay. I've seen this before. So they said, so the question on the panel was, when should you sell? And I said, well, let's assume that there's a big spike in uranium. Everybody jumps in the uranium bandwagon, just like they did with, weed stocks, crypto, and all the other nonsense, right? So let's say they jump into, like all the speculators jump into uranium and run uranium. I said, well, last time there was rumored to be 400 to 600 juniors by the end of the cycle. So I said, maybe what we should do is there's about 100 now, let's say, up from like less than 10. So that's a pretty good run. By the time there's 100 juniors out there, maybe that's the time to start piecing out your uranium, so
Start
you
to
don't
unload.
Yeah, so you're not a bag holder because trust me, on the last cycle when I was a neophyte, like many people are right now in this cycle, sure, I made a bunch of money on extract uranium, but I gave some back with some of these baloney uranium names that were put together purely just to take a, like we're talking guys with no experience in uranium. I remember one company, it was a diamond company, and they were looking for diamonds, and they said, well, Warren, we're not a diamond company, we're a uranium company. And of course, that one blew up too. And I had some friends who were no experience in uranium, started uranium companies, and they all went to zero, and everything went to zero. And
It's just cycles.
yeah.
Right?
So let's not let's not blow ourselves up on this next cycle in uranium.
That's solid advice, I think. But let's put a bow around uranium because you opened the can of worms for my maybe last question because we've been chatting for a while now. I've been tremendously enjoying it. But you said you're taking your money elsewhere.
Yep.
And so now I have to sort of ask, A, where are you taking it? And B, bit of a funny question that came to mind. Do you own any lithium juniors in the James Bay region?
Yeah, well, all right, let's start with the easy one. No on the lithium in the James Bay region. Actually, I am in the process of staking a solar with some friends. It's we could get the entire solar in a region, and we'll stake it. We'll do the testing. We'll see if they have if the brine has the nasties in it or not. So we'll see what happens. that's pretty much my only exposure to lithium. I was back in the old days. I was one of the early investors in Lithium Americas, and then Neolithium also. I did not ride them through the cycle. I remember, I don't know how many Lithium America, I forget how many years it must have been. Maybe 15 years ago that was started, and people thought the lithium craze was starting then. It was a false start, of course. And I remember Magna got involved and they were trying to source lithium, but now here we go again. Everybody wants to source lithium. They're all concerned about it and stuff. So yeah, but that's the only exposure I have to lithium. So some of the other areas I like, I like more so than the commodity. I generally like just looking at the fundamentals of the company, because what served me well in the gold sector was if I found a good gold company that would go from 0 ounces to 5 million ounces, I'd make a ton of money, even if the price of gold dropped from 1,200 to 800, So I still managed to make money doing that. So I try not to spend a ton of time trying to predict the commodity. So taking a look at, my top pick at VREC was, I tried to get some people into my session. I just don't mind sitting there talking to 2 or 3 people. So I said, Warren's top pick for 2023. So I stuck my neck out. Sure enough, I had some people show up. So it was good. But my number one pick right now is a company called Premium Nickel. Mm-hmm. It's, in my opinion, an outstanding situation. I've been looking for an amazing nickel sulfide project since Voisey's Bay. When I was a young punk kid, I saw the fortunes made in Voisey's Bay. And, it's been it's been 30 years now since Voisey's Bay. And sure enough, now I find something which I believe could be a huge winner. And if you do your work on Premium Nickel, you'll find that it's a pretty outstanding situation. And I got into in my talk a little bit about downhole EM, which is a geophysical technique used with nickel sulfides, and how if your background is clean, as it is in Botswana where the project is, meaning no graphite to interfere with your downhole EM work, there's a very, very strong correlation between EM conductors and finding nickel sulfides. In fact, near 100%. So, and the CEO of the company is a geophysical expert. So he and I understand what we've got. Nobody else understands that, just because I've been doing this looking for stupid nickel sulfide for 30 years. Like, you think I'd learn something after 30 years, but this is the one that I chosen for my 2023 top pick. And I think if you go through and you take a look at Premium Nickel and you look at how cheap it is and where it could go, and some of the takeout values on nickel sulfides in the past, and there haven't been that many, but they're generally multiple billion-dollar takeouts, you'll realize that the risk reward here is pretty extraordinary. Whereas you compare it to trying to guess what's going to happen with uranium price, like, that's not the way, in my opinion, to make money. And especially as we talked about this mystery supply that
keeps popping up there.
Yeah.
The one reason, like, I've been introduced to PNRL, that's the ticker of the company.
Yeah.
But before IPO, and they were just merging the companies and assets together, I think, back in the day. But there was one nefarious character in there that just scared me away. Okay. And I was proven to be right until I wasn't, and the stock started climbing back up. Right.
Sheldon is a fantastic mining entrepreneur. He's a dear friend of mine. I love him very much, and he has a knack of getting in early. And but sometimes he has other cash commitments, so he needs to sell a little bit here, and people sometimes read it the wrong way, and they get all concerned and say, well, Sheldon is so bullish on it, but he's selling. Well, he's probably selling to fund another junior he's bullish on too. So sometimes he sends mixed signals to the market, and I think he's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, shareholder in this name at around, I think he's around 15%. I think, frankly, Sheldon's nailed this, and he's got himself a winner, and he's been involved in quite a number of winners over the years, and but he's nailed it. So I'm jumping in there, and I own about 6 million shares on a base of about 120 million shares or so. So probably about 4 or 5% of the company I own. So put my money where my mouth is. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic, Warren! You've been you're known for making some awesome calls. Like, Next Gen was a fantastic call, and some others you mentioned as well. Pre-X I brought up long and short, some fantastic calls. So I really appreciate your time. Like we've got to put a bow around this now, Warren. Like it's been a fantastic
Yes.
conversation. I could chat with you forever. I always enjoy when we meet and hang out and catch up. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Where can we find more about you? Because you're a hedge fund. You're a resource hedge fund. There are not too many out there, I think. Like pure hedge funds. Like where can we find more? I
Yes.
think it's Rosseau.com, isn't it?
Yeah, Rosseau.com, ROSSEAU.com. But if you want, just Google my name on YouTube. There's tons of talks. Nobody I know has survived 25 years in the resource market running a hedge fund. It's a tough gig. So you got to be pretty wily to make it through without blowing yourself up. That's for sure.
And last question: is your birthday June 6th?
No, why do you ask?
Because your Twitter handle is BigDude6669. So I try to be smart.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter if you want to. If you're bored. Yes.
Twitter's awesome for the Mintwood community. There's a great Mintwood community out there. Also talking about PNRL, by the way. So quite active. Fantastic.
Cool.
Warren, thank you so much. I tremendously enjoyed the conversation. I can't wait to see you in Toronto at PDAC, and we'll catch up there, I hope.
Well, thanks for having me, Kai. Take care.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in. I tremendously enjoyed the conversation with Warren. We hope you did too. Go check out Rosseau.com as well. See how you can benefit from his ideas. Go check out the companies he's mentioned, of course, as well. Follow him on Twitter. He's a hoot on Twitter as well, so make sure to do that. And follow us. 85% of you are not subscribed to this channel that are watching. Let's change that. It's that little button on the right side down here. It's either that little circle or that square where it says subscribe. Pretty simple. Just push the button and you're subscribed. Thank you so much. We'll be back with lots more great content.